Hey y'all, back with another Spotlight with Context, and today we are talking about Yelena Belova. I'm just going to jump right into the champion attributes here, although it is worth calling out that her prestige is quite good, if that is mattering to you heading into either AQ or the new updated scaling EQ. But yeah, champion attributes, we're starting out with survivability of 3.5. She doesn't have a lot of explicit defenses as far as immunities or regen or those kind of things. But she's still definitely above average because poison immunity is good in the first place. And then she also has some very unique attack rating capping abilities that make it difficult for certain kinds of opponents to cut through her, right? This is kind of a complicated ability, and so I'll spend some more time on it later, but it makes her effectively a lot tankier. And then damage of 3.5. It's not that, 4 plus echelon that a lot of people really value in Battlegrounds, but it is absolutely sustainable damage, right? It takes her a little while to get into the rotation, but once she's there, she has guaranteed crits, she has ways of multiplying them further, and a lot of her damage is in the form of crits or instant bleeds, which are a pretty reliable damage source. Ease of use 3.5. You kind of just hit the opponent a bunch, knock them down a few times, and throw specials. There's some more complicated stuff you can do, but that's kind of the basics. And then utility of 2.5. There is some nice stuff here, kind of as with Cyclops, to counter some opponents' defensive abilities such as evade and miss, but not too much outside of really good combo gain, which is good but still relatively niche. I personally probably would have rated this a half point higher, but I get where they're coming from on this 2.5. And then Defender Strength of 5, she's annoying, right? She's very difficult to take down quickly and efficiently, and she can destroy you if you don't understand what's going on. She is definitely a less inevitable kill threat than somebody like Bullseye or Serpent, but the best possible case for dealing with her if you don't have counters to what she's doing is definitely going to involve some waiting, and that automatically adds a stall factor, which is a real threat in a lot of fights. So getting into the strengths and weaknesses, first up, I already mentioned this a little bit, but combo gain. Yelena can very quickly gain combo, and that is very helpful for some science defenders. Survivability, like we already talked about, the ways in which she's survivable are very unique and very resilient. And so while they won't save you everywhere, where they do, this is really good. So, weaknesses, we have combo gain punishment. Yelena can't help but gain combo, right? Like, if you are playing her, it's just going to go up. And so, if you're fighting somebody like Sinister, who gains regen rate when your combo goes up, or Onslaught, who gains a crush when your combo goes up, right? Those kinds of things are going to be tough. Bleed resistance is another problem because, like we talked about, a lot of her damage comes from instant bleeds. So, if you don't have access to those, that's an issue. So this bullet right here where it says daunted is a weakness, that is true in the literal sense in that it significantly mitigates her attack rating cap because it moves the cap higher, right? But I do want to shout out, it doesn't directly overcome it, right? If you are using a character with Daunted and they are trying to gain Furies, those Furies still won't work, right? It's just that Daunted is a way of increasing your damage that does do something against Yelena, whereas trying to increase attack won't. And so that is like the other aspect of this. Having any Daunted is good, but also if Daunted is how your damage scales instead of attack rating, that's good in this fight. So getting into abilities, first off, Yelena is immune to poison effects. Red room stuff, she went through a lot, poison. But also at the start of the fight, she gains an indefinite combo shield passive and a 35% endurance passive. Both of these are unaffected by ability accuracy modifications. And so she's just going to have combo shield all the time. She can't lose it unless we eventually ship something that directly attacks combo shields, but right now that's not a thing. And then 35% endurance passive. As a reminder, this reduces the duration of incoming non-dots. So she's naturally going to be harder to stun with the parry mastery. This is kind of boosting limber. If you're trying to throw, heal blocks or anything like that on her, if they're non-damaging debuffs, that's going to be a little bit harder to stick. Next up, at all times, Yelena can land critical hits through her target's block. Her base crit rate isn't that high, so this isn't necessarily something that's going to be a huge problem all the time, but you do want to watch out for it because it's possible. It's obviously a much bigger problem later on when we get to her ability for guaranteed crits. It also becomes more reliable on attack when that happens. And then critical hits inflict an instant bleed, dealing a burst of damage, and if this bleed is prevented by an immunity, it deals even more damage. It is worth noting, though, that this does not mean that the immunity replacement is better, right? She's not hunting bleed immune matchups. It's just that she has bleed vulnerabilities in her kit, which boost the instant bleed and not the replacement burst. So this kind of comes out in the wash. They're intended to largely be pretty much equal, right? But she punishes immunity, she doesn't punish resistance or ability accuracy, kind of like we talked about earlier. So next section, Yelena starts each fight in observation mode, capping her target's attack rating at 60% of what it was at the start of the fight. While Yelena is suffering from a daunted effect, this cap becomes 100%. So let's spend some time here. We kind of talked about it a little bit earlier in weaknesses, but the way this works is that it reads the opponent's attack rating at the start of the fight, so that means it takes into account boosts and, node stat increases, that kind of thing, and then caps the rating to 60% or 100% of that. This is pretty important because it means that Yelena's not, as an attacker, just shutting down the opponent's ability to benefit from node boosts. It also means Yelena, as a defender, is not turning off your ability to boost, right? She's not turning off your ability to benefit from recoil masteries. She's just reading where your attack is after all that stuff comes into play, and then cutting it down so that you can't increase it further, right? Or in the case of the 60% cap, so you can't increase it above a fraction of what it is. But this is a true cap, right? It's not a reduction. And so that means that if you are dealing with weakness effects or like inequity in the fight, then that will also kind of change things, right? If Yelena is suffering from Daunted and fighting somebody who she puts debuffs on, like a weakness, right? And then that reduces their attack rating below 100% of what it was, then a Fury could increase it back to 100%, just not further, right? We'll probably need to discuss this a bit in the comments because I know it's a new effect, but what it's doing is actually pretty simple in basically just making sure attack rating can't be higher than a percentage of what it would be against somebody else. And then also affects how much it can increase during the fight, which is particularly good against Science and Cosmic champions who generally rely on Furies, right? And so what this means is that when you are trying to deal damage to Yelena, or when you are using her as an attacker and trying to figure out what's going to hurt her, you want to be thinking about how does your opponent's damage scale, right? So if you're fighting somebody like Shocker would be a very bad Yelena counter because the way he deals damage is to gain 1,000,000 attack rating on his heavy attack. If you try and do that cash out while Yelena's in observation mode, then he won't gain any of that extra attack rating and the heavy will do nothing, right? However, if you're fighting Yelena with somebody like Black Panther Civil War, whose damage scales with his base health instead of with his modified attack, or facing somebody like Galen, whose harvest damage is based on, base attack instead of modified, then this won't do anything to them, right? Mysterio's poisons, if she wasn't immune, are another thing I can think of that are based on base attack. There are a few of those effects out there. Those are going to be really nice against Yelena. Most champions are going to feel this attack rating cap, and so observation mode is going to slow down the fight significantly, especially if you don't have access to Daunted. That's the key takeaway, now that we've kind of spent some time on it. So additionally, while observation mode is active, Yelena gains an extra combo meter each time the defender is struck by or blocks a basic attack, or another 4 if the attack was an intercept. Now note this phrasing. It says the defender. It doesn't say the opponent. We've done this before a few times, but what this means is that an attacking Yelena gains more combo for hitting her opponent, but a defending Yelena gains more combo when her opponent hits her. Right? So this plays out better than it reads because the target of who needs to be hit is changing here, but that's also who you as a player are going to be trying to hit anyway, who you as a player are going to try to intercept anyway, and so it ends up playing out pretty similarly, where the things Yelena benefits from on offense are also the things she benefits from you doing to her on defense. Same idea here, 10 combo meter each time the defender is knocked down, so if you knock her down when she's defending, she gets extra combo, but also if you're playing her and you spam heavies and knock the opponent down a lot, you're going to build combo very quickly. She also gets 50 combo meter all at once the first time the defender's brought below 50% health during a basic attack. And so that last little clause is to kind of give mutants another bonus here, because their damage tends to be concentrated in big specials. And so if you can knock her below 50% during a special, right, with a big old special, then you completely bypass this extra combo, and that's going to help you that much more. Now, one other really important thing that I want to talk about that the Spotlight calls out in the dev notes is that Yelena's only capping her opponent's attack rating while she is actively being hit. So that applies to hit damage then, and any effects that are applied during the hit. So something like Hercules' burst damage, which is, based on damage dealt, will naturally be hit by this because she's reducing the damage dealt. Something like Absorbing Man's burst damage, which is not based on damage dealt, will still be hit by this because it is based on his attack rating, and she is capping that while he's striking her when those bursts are happening. But if you had, some ability where you were hitting the opponent and then it was applying, or, a good example would be Ironheart's debuffs that she applies when she dexes, because those are not when she's actually hitting the opponent. Those would not be affected by the attack cap, even though the ones she applies on her mediums would. So that's another way that you can think of for getting around this attack rating cap. It's a very powerful ability, but there are chinks in the armor that you can find ways to access. So that's observation mode. That implies the existence of another mode, and here we are. When Yelena's combo meter reaches 100 or higher, she switches from observation to elimination mode after 10 seconds. Now what that means is, like it implies in the next sentence, when you get to 100, a timer starts, right? You stay in observation mode, and you can keep gaining combo for that 10 seconds if you would like to. Or you can activate a special attack to end this timer early and go into elimination mode at a point of your choosing. So this basically means you can't just sit in observation mode forever. Eventually you're going to build enough combo, 10 seconds will pass, you will be forced into elimination mode. But as long as you're not waiting longer than that 10 seconds, you do have the choice on when to pull the trigger and make the switch, which is pretty nice. It also means it's somewhat predictable when you're fighting Yelena on defense, because if you are keeping her from throwing specials, you have some control over when she goes into elimination mode, because you can kind of manipulate the AI and influence when she throws that first special after reaching 100, and it makes things a bit more predictable. So there's some play for you going both ways here. Then when Yelena's combo meter falls below 5, she switches back to observation mode. So that, of course, means that we're going to see some combo dropping mechanics here, right? While elimination mode is active, Yelena loses 5 combo meter each time either champion is struck or blocks a basic attack. So this trigger is truly symmetrical, right? If she's hitting you, which, as we see in the next line, means guaranteed critical hits, which, reminder, means guaranteed instant bleeds. If she's hitting you, then she does lose 5 combo, but that's probably not something you want to happen a lot unless you have answers to her guaranteed crits. But that also means that you can punch through elimination mode by striking her block or striking her, right? Because that's also going to drop this combo meter. And note that the attack cap doesn't apply during this mode. So Yelena is a lot more dangerous, but she is also kind of in glass cannon mode here. And so if you figure out how to play around the threats of elimination mode and deal damage, your attack won't be capped here, and you can deal more damage. So there is quite a bit of counterplay with her threats, but we haven't gotten through all of them, so let's keep going. During elimination mode, Yelena's personal abilities are unaffected by ability accuracy. So this means, we already mentioned Ironheart, so I'll use her again. During observation mode, if Yelena crits through her block, it won't apply the instant bleed, right? Because if Ironheart has the tracking up, then that's going to stop the instant bleed. During elimination mode, that's no longer true. Now the instant bleed is ability accuracy protected and will cut through. So again, her threats elevate even as her defenses go down, except this next little threat, which is kind of a defense, which is that when Yelena would be struck by a light or heavy attack, she executes a reversal, inflicts 4 instant bleeds, and then loses 15 combo meter. You probably don't want to intentionally play into this without a lot of defenses, because you are going to get hit and you're going to take those 4 instant bleeds, right? But technically, if you have an answer to those instant bleeds that isn't immunity or ability accuracy, specifically for this phase, then you could intentionally trigger the reversal to trigger that 15 combo meter reduction and get her out of elimination mode faster. There are going to be very, very few characters that can safely do this, but I want to call it out because there's some opportunities for risk-taking there. Now, one important thing to call out here is that by default, this doesn't apply to mediums, right? And that means that you can interceptor, you can do mediums. It also makes it safer to hit into her block. This was kind of something that we called out in playtests. It might feel more restrictive for us to block out lights, but it was working out that restricting mediums was worse if it was up all the time, because it meant that you couldn't safely hit into her block, right? Because even if she didn't have a bar of power and there was no possibility of her special intercepting you, it happened a couple times to me specifically, which is why I'm giving you this anecdote, that I would go to hit her block and try to cut down her combo meter, and she would just, for whatever reason, drop her block. And then I would get a reversal to the face instead, right? So you don't have to worry about that. We helped you out, but do be very careful with your lights and heavies, right? You'll also sometimes have to be careful with your mediums. We'll get to that in a minute, but that's not an always thing. So her heavy attack inflicts a 40% bleed vulnerability debuff for 18 seconds. This is paused during specials, and she gets up to 3 of them. So you can get 120% extra bonus to your bleeds, more than doubling the damage they do. Like we said earlier, that higher damage on the bleed replacement against immunity is not meant to be a bonus. She's not hunting bleed immunes because you don't get access to this huge bonus to your bleeds. It's also worth pointing out that this is a knockdown, right? That's what heavy attacks do, and so you're getting this bleed vulnerability to ramp your damage, but you're also getting combo gain. And so this is a good way to ramp up before you head into elimination mode to cash in. So getting into the special attacks, the special 1 on activation gives her an impact passive, increasing block penetration for 10 seconds. You can definitely dex this, but it does mean that if you're not comfortable with the dex, it's going to hurt because she's going to have those guaranteed crits into block as well as the bleeds. And then for a while after the special one, you're going to have to worry about how much harder she hits into block 2. When you're in observation mode, this impact gives her an extra 5 combo meter each time she hits her target's block. This is more of an attacker tool for you to use to ramp faster, but it definitely can be relevant on defense. And then for elimination, while this impact is active, Yelena can execute a reversal against medium attacks. So this is really important, right? Because this means that for 10 seconds after her special 1, you can't use any basics. Medium, light, and heavy, all of them will trigger reversal. And so this is one of those stall threats I talked about earlier, right? If you don't have an answer to those instant bleeds, you have to wait for 10 seconds after every special one unless you have access to special attacks, right? And if you have access to special attacks, if you're sitting on a special when this is thrown, or you have power gain for somebody like Hyperion, then yeah, you can dex this and then intercept or sidestep into a special, and you'll be okay. But again, with that theming of like mutants do their damage in specials, right? This is another one of those. Basic attacks against her are rough. This also means that during this part, you are going to have to be a little bit more careful hitting into her block to try and cut out elimination mode for that same reason that I mentioned earlier. So next up we have the Special 2. The final hit inflicts a non-stacking disarm passive for 15 seconds, and this can be inflicted through block. Okay, and this disarm is a new type that is also a lock for attack, but also for block proficiency. So what this is doing is it is reading the opponent's current attack and block proficiency and then locking them to half of that for the rest of the time that this is active, right? And so that means that this can be a huge problem to your damage in observation mode because you already have that cap on your attack to 60% it was at the start of the fight. This will then lock it to 50% of that. So if you are in observation mode and you block the Special 2, if you block the final hit of the Special 2 and you get this disarm on you, then your attack is capped at 30% of what it was at the start of the fight, which is obviously a huge problem. It locking your block proficiency to half is also a huge problem because it means that all of her hits are going to be a bigger issue through block. Even parries are going to hurt. And if she does trigger guaranteed crits, either through random chance or because she's in elimination mode, they're going to hurt that much more. So the Special 2 dex is possible, and especially the end of the Special 2 is possible. That is something that you're going to want to learn how to do because that disarm passive is obnoxious. When in observation mode, inflicting this grants an additional 50 combo meters, so the Special 2 ramps you up really nicely. And then in an elimination mode, inflicting disarm refreshes all bleed vulnerability effects and then pauses them for 8 seconds, so you don't have to worry about continuing to throw heavies, which would cost you combo, right, because it's striking the opponent, and you just have that damage magnifier up with better uptime for a little while longer. And you can kind of just focus on dealing damage. Special 2 is really nice for both modes. The Special 3 inflicts a critical bleed passive, which deals damage but then is multiplied by Yelena's critical damage multiplier, and that lasts for 12 seconds. This can do a lot of damage, and starts paused for 12 whole seconds if her target is indestructible or below 5% max health, right? So this makes it pretty darn good for finishing off tricky opponents as long as they can bleed, because it's just going to sit there and keep hurting, right? The pause means that it even works against opponents that reduce the duration of bleed effects as long as you throw this when they're below 5% health. And then the signature ability, while Yelena's in observation mode, her target's critical damage rating is also capped at 50% of what it was at the start of the fight. This scales with SIG, so that cap is going to be higher at lower SIG, and then down here at max SIG, but That means that you're hitting both attack and critical damage rating, which is going to shut off a lot of damage modifiers. And then while Yelena's in elimination mode, her target cannot evade or cause attacks to miss. That just turns on at Sig 1 and has no effect against mutants. So that's going to be really important to using Yelena on attack because it just gives you that huge piece of utility at Sig 1 in elimination mode, and also adds some threat to her on defense, right? Because one of the things that can get around reversal is if that incoming hit is evaded or misses. But that doesn't work if you can't evade or cause attacks to miss because she's duped. So watch out for that difference between duped and unduped Yelena. Moving on to synergies, first up we have the Red Room with the other Black Widows, her sisters. And while the opponent is suffering from a bleed vulnerability debuff, Yelena also inflicts a non-stacking 25% sabotage debuff, so this is going to give you some defensive ability accuracy reduction, which she's otherwise missing, and deal some extra direct damage, specifically by inflicting Yelena's instant bleed. So this is kind of a unique effect because it means that that sabotage damage, which is normally just a burst of direct damage, is subject to bleed resistance, but as a trade-off is also magnified by her bleed vulnerabilities. So cool little ability there. And then for the two Black Widows, they start each fight with an indefinite 35% endurance passive, and so just answer all of those various non-damaging debuffs that much better. Mercenary competition with Silver Sable, Hitmonkey, Absorbing Man, and Deadpool X-Force. For Yelena, her impact and disarm effects start paused for 6 seconds, which is quite nice because it also means that you can combine them better. And applying the disarm to the opponent and then throwing her special one potentially into block while you have that impact up is really nice. Yelena isn't necessarily going to be a champion you play all into block like Massacre or Valkyrie, but she does have the ability to do a lot of damage through block if you set her up properly. And the other thing that that impact is going to do is that if you're in elimination mode, which is normally when you're trying to deal damage, you're also going to have that reversal protection if your opponent tries to punish your special one, right? So this synergy is really nice for just letting you do that thing you can already do better. And then for all mercenary or villain champions, they get extra attack rating and extra critical damage rating. Shout out specifically to Absorbing Man for benefiting from this critical damage rating increase 3 times when he's in his refined modes. Perfectly placed shots with Hawkeye, Bullseye, and Longshot. The 4 synergy champions, their bleed effects inflicted during a non-contact attack gain 25% potency, but this doesn't apply to the special 3. So Hawkeye's special 1 and 2, all of Bullseye's bleeds during his specials, and Longshot's special 1 all get a big old damage boost. AIM alumni with MODOK, Sunspot, Hulkling, and Wiccan. These 5 synergy champions gain extra attack rating and extra critical damage rating, but these bonuses are specifically doubled while above 25 combo meter. Now it's worth pointing out that because MODOK is a villain, as well as being listed in this synergy, he can benefit from both of those attack rating and critical damage rating increases. But that's just him. And then teammates with Red Guardian, Taskmaster, and Ghost, your standard generic for perfect block chance. But yeah, that's Yelena. I think she's quite fun to play. The combo mechanics are cool, and her HUD got special treatment that her designer coded for combo game mechanics like this. You'll see it return because it's really cool, but it draws attention to the combo meter in a way that really lets you know what you're doing and keep track of it, and just, I find, makes the whole experience a lot more enjoyable. And then she has a really solid payoff for doing it with some cool utility. She is a nasty defender, right? And so I imagine a lot of y'all listening to this are listening primarily with that in mind and are not going to like her for a while, and that's okay. But I promise there are ways to play around her, and when you figure those things out, she is more a stall threat. There are some ways to deal real damage to her. Pay attention to your daunted characters for sure, and we'll see more in the future. But yeah, let me know what you're thinking in the comments, and until next time, thank you so much for watching, and take care.